This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and here's an El Cheapo model from probably the mid-1930s. This is a Trav-Ler, little small wooden case table radio. This is one of the models with the infamous resistance line cord and no power transformer. Yeah, that does look probably around 33, 34, somewhere around in there. I don't even know the model number of it. I see someone's added a jack here on the side, probably for either an external speaker or antenna. I'm leaning more towards speaker. We'll know more once we get into it. Most likely this is a TRF set, and given that fact, and well, there have been some TRF sets made that were very sensitive. I had a Philco 95 console whenever I was a teenager, and that thing would pull in stations, but given this is a cheapie, it's not going to be a station magnet. These are pretty much for local stations only. Alright, let's go get it apart and see what we have inside. Yeah, just to waste time, we have our ohm meter connected across the power plug. I'm going to switch it on and see if I get any continuity. I really don't expect to, and I don't. No surprise there. More than likely that resistance line cord is open. They usually are by now. Looking under the chassis, I see a blue electrolytic capacitor and an orange one, but other than that, everything else looks to be original. Those two are obviously replacements. And that one on the top side looks like a replacement too. Speaker looks pretty much intact. I see a 152-W written on the chassis. I don't know if that's a model number or not. We'll try to find out something on it. It's always nice to have a schematic to fix these things, but I'm sure I could fix it without one. It just may take me a little longer. 25Z5 rectifier and a 43 output tube. And these are the old pre-octal type tubes. Yeah, I'm thinking this is probably no newer than about 33 or 34, I'd say. And a 6D6 tube here and a 6C6 tube here. And I think this 43 or whatever it is also a 25 volt filament. I'll have to look it up. So 25, 50, and the two 6s are 12. So 62 volts total tube filament voltage. And then this line cord dropping resistor was supposed to drop the other roughly 60 volts. Nice old Quam speaker here that hopefully is intact. The cone looks pretty good. Hopefully it'll sound okay. Okay, so that R8 or whatever it is the, I can't make it out, but that's your line cord dropping resistor. And you see we have our two dial bulbs and our filaments, tube filaments in series. And the reason we have resistors in parallel with the two dial lamps is because in a series circuit, each item in that circuit must have the same current draw. And the tube filaments are each 300 milliamps. So the dial bulbs have to be that too, so they have those resistors in parallel with the bulbs to get the correct current draw there from each bulb. And another reason for the resistors is in case one or more of the dial bulbs burn out, the radio will still play. Okay, so what do we do about substituting this resistor here that's part of the line cord? The first option is to go with a big power resistor, but we need to calculate what value we need. And to do that, we'll use Ohm's law. That's about as complicated as my mathematical skills are. So first we need to determine the heater voltage of each tube. The 6D6 and 6C6 are both 6.3 volt tubes. The 25Z5 and the 43 are both 25 volt tubes. And dummy me, when I first figured this up, I forgot to figure in the dial lamps, which I presume are 2.5 volts each, because that was pretty much the standard value in the before about 1936. So that would be 5 volts for the dial bulbs. So adding all that up, that's 67.6 volts that's required to properly heat up the tube filaments and illuminate the dial bulb. Well, unfortunately, our AC line voltage is 120 volts, and those tube filaments and the dial bulbs wouldn't last long with that kind of voltage applied across it, so we have to use a resistor to drop it down. First thing we need to do is determine how much voltage needs to be dropped, so we take our AC line voltage of 120 and subtract 67.6 volts from that. That gives us 52.4 volts that have to be dropped. Okay, so we know now how much voltage has to be dropped. Now what value of resistor do we use? Employing Ohm's law, R equals E over I, or resistance equals voltage divided by current. We take our voltage that needs to be dropped, 52.4 volts, divided by 0.3 amps, and that gives us a resistance value of 174.6. Well, you can't buy a resistor of exactly that value, so we'll go up to 200 ohms, which is the more common value. Now we need to know how much power is going to be dissipated by that resistor. So once again, we go back to Ohm's law. P equals IE, or wattage equals current times voltage. Okay, so we take our 52.4 volts, it has to be dropped, E, and multiply that times 0.3 amps, I, and that gives us a wattage of 15.72. Well, to be on the safe side, we'll go with a 25 watt resistor there. I went ahead and ordered a metal cased power resistor that is chassis mountable. Hopefully we can have room to mount the thing. The main advantage to using a resistive dropper is you can run the set on DC, which you probably are not going to do in 2020, but just in case you decide to do so, you can. And also, a power resistor failure mode is most likely open. So if that happens, the radio will just be dead. Now there are a couple other ways to get around our resistance line cord issue. The next one is to use a heavy-duty silicon rectifier diode in the filament string. And what that does, that will strip away, or block will be a more appropriate term, the negative cycle of the incoming AC, so the tube filaments will only see the positive cycle, but you'll likely still have to put a power resistor in series with a diode, which creates more heat, which we're trying to get around. The disadvantage of that scheme is you won't be able to operate the radio on DC, and also the most likely failure mode for the diode is short circuit. I can't tell you how many silicon diodes that I've replaced over the years that were shorted, and if that diode shorts, your tube filaments are going to see way too much voltage and not going to last very long. So that brings us to the third way to solve this problem, and that's to use a capacitive dropper. And those mathematical formulas get a little complex for that, but there's stuff on the internet that you can use to figure that out. Generally speaking, you'll want to put a capacitor in place of the resistive element in the line cord, generally a value between 1 microfarad and 8 microfarads, depending on the radio. And you don't want to use an electrolytic capacitor for this operation. You want to use a film capacitor. And there again, the disadvantage to that is the size of the capacitor. And also, the failure mode for the capacitor will most likely be to short, but the capacitor will be less likely to short than the diode will. And another disadvantage is you'll have to operate the radio on 60 cycle AC only. It will not work on DC, and if you try to operate it on any other frequency of AC, that will cause problems. And the biggest advantage to using the capacitive dropper is there's very little heat dissipated. For right now, I'm going to go with the resistor and see what happens, and then we'll decide later what we want to do from there. As far as the model number of this radio, 152W, assuming that even is the model number, I couldn't find anything on Nostalgia Air or anywhere else on the internet for that matter, so I just looked around on Nostalgia Air for a similar schematic, and I found a model 42F. It uses the exact same tube lineup as the set here. In fact, the only difference I see is the position of the tubes. This schematic has the tubes all in a row, where my chassis has one of the tubes back over here on the front of the chassis, while the other three tubes are on the back here. And by the way, this is indeed a TRF set. RF amplifier tube, detector and audio amplifier tube, audio output tube, and the rectifier tube. So having only a single stage of RF amplification, like I've already said, don't expect much sensitivity here. This is mainly for local stations only, and don't expect high fidelity sound. These generally sound a bit on the tinny side. Here's the old power cord, and when you run into one of these cloth covered cords, be careful because the outer cloth covering may look okay, but as is the case with this one, the wiring under the cloth covering, the insulation isn't okay, and that's just a disaster waiting to happen. I've replaced the power cord. I have not substituted in a resistor yet. I'm checking across the filament string, and I'm reading 565 ohms, which to me seems a bit high. So I'm going to trace down through this and just make sure everything's what it's supposed to be. Okay, I haven't really figured out the exceptionally high resistance reading yet, and I think this radio is a little bit different than what the schematic is. So what I've done, I have the dropping resistor bypassed, and I'm feeding about 60 volts into the radio from the isolation transformer, and as you can tell, we're getting a little activity. Not bad.
Hey, Farmer, CEO of Quicken Loans. 30% of Americans who are planning home improvement may not be a great idea. A better idea. Call us today at 800.
Well, we're getting all of the local stations, and that's not bad for a 80-something-year-old radio running on low line voltage and having most of its original parts still installed. Well, what do you know? I was looking through my junk box trying to find some resistors I could cobble together, and I found a 200 ohm one. Maybe I should have looked through the junk box before I ordered any, but it don't matter. They'll be used for something else one day, probably in another radio like this one. Alright, there we are. Alright, this filter is getting a little warm to the touch, not too hot, but slightly warm, and so I think we need to go ahead and get rid of that and just go from there. You know, we do have a little filter hum, so just start with the basics and work our way on to the finish line. Left old capacitor, which appears to be a 10 microfarad 250 volt. And it's obvious that it was replaced, probably back in the 40s. On the right, we have a new 22 microfarad. I could fit 5 of these new ones inside of this old blob here. This is one of those setups where the filter capacitors are common positive, and one of the filter capacitors connects to ground, which is chassis, and then the other one is elevated through this choke and this resistor here, which looks like a 75 ohm. And I see why I was getting the funky filament readings now through the filament string, because I was measuring from the filament line to the chassis, and the end of this filament string doesn't go to chassis, so I was actually reading through this choke and this resistor here, so that solves that problem. Here's the filter choke right here, and the audio output transformer is mounted on the speaker itself. Now normally they would use the speaker field coil for the choke, but in this case they're not doing that. They have a separate choke, and the speaker field is just shunted across the B+ output, so that's kind of strange. Measuring the resistance across the power cord, I'm reading about 270 ohms, and 200 of that is that dropping resistor, so that's what I expect to see. So yeah, if I'd looked a little bit closer at this tiny schematic and paid a little bit better attention to it, I wouldn't have been going around in circles, because I was measuring my filament string in reference to chassis, and that's not the correct place to measure it. Okay, I noticed the audio was a bit distorted, so I have lifted the plate to grid coupling capacitor for the output tube. I should not see any DC at all on this side of the capacitor that goes to the grid. Let's see what we actually see. Yeah, about 56, 55, 58 volts there. So yeah, that capacitor is extremely leaky and needs to be replaced. Because the capacitor is supposed to block DC. That one ain't blocking it very well. That capacitor is turned into a resistor. Here's the capacitor that's going to be our replacement, a 1960s or 70s era chocolate drop. Now whenever I test the voltage on this output end of the capacitor, there should be nothing. And look at that. That looks nice. And that's what it's supposed to do. Block DC. And there we are. I had to sandwich it down in there between the two tube sockets because this chassis is so shallow that really not enough room. What all the static's about. Sounds like silver mica disease, only this set doesn't have IF transformers.
He was last seen
shut up.
Yeah, the liquor store. Bahamas. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was joking. He was in the Bahamas, and now he's taking his talent golf course as well. So he's doing his most right now. Trusted. Yeah, well, we hope not. Hopefully his post parents were pretty well off. Yes.
Alright, let's continue. Found another leaky capacitor. It's this one that connects between the screen grid of the 6C6 detector and first audio tube to ground. Have one end connected to the high voltage side, and on the other end I'm getting about 38 volts there, so that one's passing DC like crazy, so we need to change that one. The schematic calls for 0.1. There was a 0.01 in there, so we'll go with what was in there, seeing as how it looked original. And you can see we're kind of running low on 0.01s. It's a good thing I have a Mauser order coming pretty soon. And next we have this capacitor that connects between the plate of the audio output tube and the chassis. And let's see, on the plate we have 100 volts. Let's see what we have on the other end of it. 85 volts, 86 volts. Yeah, that capacitor is very leaky. Now, generally these capacitors with high voltage on one side, when they become leaky, they don't get better, they get worse. And what would have eventually happened sooner or later is we'll use this capacitor for an example. It would have dead shorted, and that could have very easily caused too much current to draw through the audio output transformer, and then that would have been the end of the transformer. Well, we're fixing to be down to 1.01 capacitor, so my Mauser order had better hurry up and get here. Here's another one on the RF amplifier tube. From the tube to ground, we have 111 volts on the high voltage side of it. Oops, that one's on an RF coil, and it's a 0.1, and as you can tell, I had to lift the coil to get to it. And while we have that up, we might as well address these filter capacitors while we're here.
How far?
Okay, I moved the filter capacitor from over here by the RF coil over here to the power supply. Yes, it's a little congested in there, but that freed up that area over there because that's a possible mounting place for the dropper resistor right here.
I don't know if you understand.
I was checking all these old dog bone resistors, and they are all well within tolerance, and I see a capacitor buried under there that I missed, and it looks like it's going to be a bit of a booger to get to, so let's see about it. Okay, 0.1 microfarad capacitor that was hidden down in here, and I had to dismount this terminal strip to get it out. Had a smaller low voltage 0.1 microfarad that I put it right here, and there's only something like 5 volts right here, so this will do just fine. Now let me resolder the terminal strip back where it belongs. And this thing's just still not as perky as I think it could be, and I don't think this will make much difference, but here's another capacitor from the volume control, which is in the front end. I think the other end connects to ground. Let's replace that and just go ahead and get it out of the way. A 0.01 capacitor that connects from this point on the volume control, which happens to be also connected to chassis ground, goes under and connects to this terminal right here on this little terminal strip. The thing is, there's nothing else on that terminal strip, and it just keeps getting blurrier instead of better. Alright, that's a little better. Okay, but I can see evidence of what looks like a wire was soldered here, so I'm wondering if this was the terminal for the earth ground wire for your antenna system, and that 0.01 was just an isolation capacitor so it would be safe to ground this set. That's what we're going to say it is anyway. Alright, we're connected to the outside antenna, and we're on a local station turned wide open, and this thing's just still not as perky as it should be, so I'm going to try adjusting these trimmers on the tuning condenser and see if that helps it. If the thing will stay still and let me do this.
They're the voices and names that give you the sports and entertainment you need on Fox Sports Radio.
Nope, that doesn't appear to be helping things any.
To find FS1 on your television, go to foxsports.com for details.
And gave you access. Studios. That's a soundtrack for verbal fitness.
passed away, but I'm for sure he's going to be talking to God sometime today. This darkness going on here, but I love Kenny with all my heart.
We're getting
my
some
heart's
distant
broken,
stations.
and a big old chunk of it has gone with him today.
It's
and
just
I
not
think
as perky as it could be, I don't think. So let's check some voltages and see if we can find anything. Okay, I went back through and resoldered all of the connections on the tube sockets, including the ones that were untouched from the factory and my own, and it seems to have perked up some. However, I still have the volume wide open.
Praise 9:10 a.m. 38 years ago.
in a creek and drown them or something instead of taking them.
Now, this is one of the disadvantages of a TRF set, particularly a cheap TRF set. When you have a hot station, it kind of blows any selectivity out of the water. As you can tell, we pretty much run from 1010 straight into 1390, and 1390 stays with us until the top end of the dial, so 1450 is a no-go.
All right, because of all the things you do, are you the one that basically has to do?
However, I think we need to take this volume pot apart and try to clean it. It's kind of funny feeling. It feels kind of rough in spots, and
Had to be that. Oh, well, that's good. Yeah. They train you in how to euthanize and all of this. You know. Well, I remember when I've had to, and I sat by my dogs when they had to be put to sleep.
Yes, ma'am.
And they inject them, and it's not. I don't think it's supposed to be painful or anything for the animal. They just sort of go to sleep.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And you just watch them, you know, close their eyes and everything.
And I have the pot disconnected and connected to the ohm meter, starting out at 1.7K, and I'm going to slowly turn it, and you can see it's already all over the place. Yeah, this pot needs to be taken apart and thoroughly cleaned. See, now we're at the other end and it's reading 16K. Now back to the other extreme where it was reading 1.7 before, now it's 2.2. Alright, let's move to the other end of the pot, see what we get. 18.2. And 1 point, yeah, this thing needs to be taken apart and cleaned, and still no guarantee that's going to help it. Now, I really didn't have any luck getting this pot out. I suppose I could have gotten it out, but the speaker is in the way. And I would have had to have taken that out, which would have messed up my dial stringing here. I don't want to do that. I tried getting this out as it was with what tools I have, and it's just on there too tight. It's just not coming out. So I pried up one of the little tabs that holds the pot together, pried the case open enough to squirt some juice down in it, and I've worked it back and forth about 50 times, and we're going to see if that has any effect on it. Alright, let's rotate it through its range slowly. I mean, it's still erratic. Yeah, you saw it jump way up there just then. I'll keep robo-twerculating it some more and try to get that cleaner to penetrate in there, but this is probably going to be about as good as it gets. And I ask myself, why am I even fixing this? Because even at peak performance, I don't think this one's going to be hot enough to get WSM at night. So I'm pretty much going to be stuck with the 3 local AMs that this thing is capable of receiving, none of which carry programming that I really care to listen to. So this is pretty much going to be one of those, let's have a little fun to get it working and then put it back together and sit it on the shelf forever. Alright, here's our mumble gospel music. See, there's a little action there, but this is not. But this is pretty much long wire antenna, local, strong local reception only. And now we're trying to come up with a way to mount this honking power resistor in a somewhat safe place. It fits right here on the rear apron of the chassis, but the previous problem was they had one of the RF transformers mounted here. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to mount this RF transformer to the other side of the chassis here. Of course, I'll have to drill a hole in the chassis to do it, and then drill a couple of holes in this rear apron and mount our power resistor here. That way it'll be out in the open for ventilation, and it can use this chassis for a heat sink. I really wasn't too cool with having it inside the chassis here, because that's just all that heat closed up inside here. And of course I will put some heat shrink tubing on these leads here, since they're going to be exposed. Okay, we have the power resistor moved, and I ran the leads in such a way that they won't be touching the outside of this resistor, and we have heat shrink tubing over the terminals in case they should get bent. We don't want them touching the chassis, and we don't want somebody to touch them and get the crap knocked out of them. Only thing you're going to have to be careful with is this antenna wire that what am I saying, the only thing it's not like I'm going to put this thing up for sale. In fact, I'm getting kind of fed up with eBay, but that's another story. But anyway, I changed this antenna wire out and put a clip lead on the end, because you're probably going to have to use I'm probably going to have to use a longer antenna. They just had it originally soldered to the antenna coil with no strain relief, so I used the old filter capacitor mounting bracket for a strain relief. You want to make sure this doesn't come down and touch this hot resistor. As far as the antenna coil, I'm moving its mounting to the front of the chassis, or RF transformer, whatever the heck it is. But unfortunately, some of these leads are not long enough to stretch, so I'm going to have to extend those leads. But hopefully this thing will play when we're all done. Okay, here we are with the RF transformer moved. Now, if we don't have any fussy interaction between this transformer and this filter choke, we ought to be okay. And there's only one way to find out. That's turn it on and see what happens.
Spiritually looks for a reason to be out of God.
Seems to be working as good as it did before. So
a man that was managing a store in.
I know I will. That Miss Moore.
Yeah.
Now Miss Moore is a character.
Yeah. It's an autobiographical.
Find your wings at Meridian Community College.
Alright, here we are back together.
Alabama's news station, AM 1010, WMOX Meridian. After being diagnosed with coronavirus.
Continue between Congress and the White House tonight on an economic rescue package, just as President Donald Trump took to the podium in the White House briefing room. The Senate was turning back the aid package on the procedural votes. The negotiations are continuing on Capitol Hill. The president telling the country that we
So I've done about all I'm going to do to this. If it needs another dial light, the bottom bulb is burned out. I don't think I have any 2.5 volts handy, bulbs handy, and it could stand a new volume control pot, but I'm not going to worry about that either. But quite honestly, when I turn this off at the end of this video, it probably won't get turned back on again for a long time, so just mainly wanted to hear it play.
Testing site will open Monday.
And as you can tell, this cabinet's not in the best of shape.
Showing symptoms. He also says the rise in number of cases was expected.
When things settle down with all this coronavirus, I might put it on eBay. I don't know, but really not much need right now because, number one, if they put us on lockdown here, I won't be able to take any packages to drop them off, and number two, after the record player I had on there with 700 and something lookers and 14 watchers and not one single bidder, that pretty much sent a message to me that there's really no need in putting anything on there. Just something I really don't understand. You'd think with that much activity there would be at least one bidder, but I guess not. So we're going to let the eBay thing cool down a while, and I'll just keep hoarding this stuff.
Millions of
one thing that's odd, when I disconnect the outside antenna,
the Trade Commission says scammers are thriving.
Among the scams that most concern the government watchdogs, sellers online
of the antenna lead, I get more gain.
Toilet paper.
But I also get a lot of squealing and crap.
Charities may say they'll collect cash for good, but the money and other poser attempts to collect your account or social security.
But we're not going to worry about all that. It's a cheapo radio. It probably did that whenever it was new.
Sky-high quotes from other companies because he takes meds to control the coronavirus, but no deaths. The new arrangement, which goes into effect at 10 p.m. local time, excludes those working in essential sectors, such as health and security. The West Bank has been on partial lockdown for close to 3 weeks, with movement between regions and even between some villages and cities prohibited. Sunday's more stringent order did not include the Gaza Strip. The first 2 coronavirus cases there were reported overnight between Saturday and Sunday. I'm Lawrence Rifkin, SRN News, Jerusalem.
More details at themedialine.org and srnnews.com. I'm Gordon Griffin. And here's your weather forecast for this Sunday. You're looking at rain and scattered thunderstorms in the afternoon. High 74. Winds will be out of the south-southeast at 5 to 10 miles an hour. Chance of rain will be 70%. Tonight, scattered thunderstorms, low 62. Winds south-southwest at 5 to 10 miles an hour. Chance of rain will be 60%. Monday, we're looking at more about the same. More scattered showers. High 73, low 62. Chance of rain 80%. That's your weather forecast at WMER 93.1 FM, 1390 AM. Your Good News Gospel Radio.
Hey guys, this is Pat Barker of the Guardians. You're listening to WMER 93.1 FM, 1390 AM, your Good News Gospel Radio in Meridian, Mississippi. The person who stays physically fit will not only look good and feel good, their skin, tissue, organs, and bones will all have the components of youth.
From your local weather expert, WWL-TV meteorologist
WWL out of New Orleans is coming in.
John Bell Edwards today acts to strike at the coronavirus by signing a stay-at-home directive and ordering the closure of all non-essential businesses till further notice.
All places of public amusement, whether indoors or outdoors, including but not limited to locations with amusement rides, carnivals, amusement parks, water parks, trampoline parks, aquariums, zoos, museums, arcades, fairs, pool halls, children's play centers, playgrounds, theme parks.
Frank Friedman is at 21st Avenue and Blair in South Philly's World Village with a soldier on the side. That's how you know you're there, and it's the first week of spring, 2020, Frank. Well, Bill, here it is. Spring is in the air. This is the perfect time to practice my three favorite forms of social distancing. Tonight, as Pat
There's something coming in weak. Yep, that's WSM just barely coming in. And it's not even dark out yet, so I'd say that's pretty good. Not really loud enough to be usable, but there it is.
Cough or shortness of
day, and they're capping the tests at 250 people per site per day to keep the labs from getting overwhelmed. Lakeshore Drive from Franklin Avenue in the east to shelter number 1 in the west is closed to motor vehicle traffic today. Individuals who ride bicycles and walkers or runners still have access to the area. To reduce large gatherings and crowds to slow the spread of COVID-19 coronavirus. The Flood Control Authority will alert the public once the roadway reopens again.
And 910's bleeding over onto 870 because this radio has basically no selectivity.
Prior to the structure, prompting a heavy response from the New Orleans.
I'm in the Facebook app, so if you open it up in newsfeed, you should see a link to it, and if you do a search,
a little more than 30 minutes later. Several squatters living in the structure stated one female was still in the building somewhere. Fire crews searched but were unable to find her. That woman...
When there was a storm, everybody was...
Okay, before we end, let's have a little fun. We have 8 paper capacitors that came out of this radio. I know some of them we checked for leakage as we were taking them out. Some of them we didn't, so let's just check them all and see how bad they are. And this radio gives us a convenient high voltage test point right here at the rear of the chassis where this filter attaches.
Yeah, right.
We're all on mandatory lockdown.
Yeah, no, he
gives us 102 volts there, so let's see how leaky these capacitors really are.
More coming up in a
Cap
few.
1. Come on, stay on there.
Trimble has been stopping champions on the track as well as drivers.
94 volts.
Pilot team missed start.
Cap 2, 80 some odd volts.
For temporary relief of mild symptoms of by pediatric cancer.
3, 94, 97 volts.
One of nature's most it's wild up there.
5, 91, 92 volts.
Today, we've been helping people take the
6,
vacation of a lifetime for over
101 volts. Yeah, that's just about shorted.
What it would be like to Alaska or
7,
guided vacation package. You need to call YMT Vacation.
76, 77 volts, 75 volts.
First day of life.
8, 90 volts.
An infant dies from infection.
Here are the electrolytics. This is the one that was running a little warm, a 10 microfarad. And these are the two they had in parallel. Here's the one that was running warm, high ESR, which I figured. Here's the blue one, wide open. And the orange one, about 1.5 ohms of ESR, so that one's still respectable. And the orange 20 microfarad, 23 microfarad, that's within tolerance. The blue one's going to be open. Yep, the blue one's open. Here's the 10 microfarad that was a little warm. It's reading 15. The one that's still good is an Olson Acrad. Olson Radio Warehouse Incorporated, Akron, Ohio, made in USA. I'll throw that one in my parts pile that I use for resurrections. Alright, it's about 8 p.m. We'll do a final band scan, although I don't think there will be much to scan, and then we'll call it a day. No WSM. There's WBAP very faintly.
We would like to stop at Nuke to provide meals to the youth.
There's the local black gospel station.
50 snacks and over Toyota Camry.
Corolla, Tacoma.
The local talk station.
Every Thursday. Listen on the iHeartRadio app.
All right, come on and give me a station ID.
iHeartRadio Sunday Night Podcast. Listen every week as we feature a different podcast. One of the most shared and most listened to from the iHeartRadio app. Now, #1 for podcasting. Discover your next favorite podcast from over 250,000. Available right now by downloading the free iHeartRadio app.
I don't care who cares. It's an iHeart station, so it's not worth stopping on anyway. And now we're getting into 1390.
New England Patriots will sign quarterback Brian Hoyer, who was just cut by the Colts yesterday. The Jets signed
that could be for our 1450 coming in.
Last calls fire with host.
Nearly $2 trillion measure. A slush house soon.
Says Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is.
You've got honor.
So yeah, like I said earlier in this video, these types of radios are not a DX machine. They're made for they were a cheap radio when they were new, and they were made for the strongest local stations, and that's about it. Okay, I'm looking at the schematic again. I'm just really not happy with the performance of this. And what I'm seeing on the schematic doesn't exactly add up with how the antenna is connected to this radio here. Okay, this is what somebody had done. They had the antenna connected here, which goes to the secondary of the antenna transformer and to the first section of the tuning condenser into the control grid. So we were bypassing this first section's primary winding completely. And the antenna actually goes to this terminal strip here that I first thought was some kind of ground connection. Antenna lead goes there. 0.01 microfarad capacitor connects to the antenna, and the other side connects to the antenna control, or volume control. Well, I guess it's not going to cooperate, but anyway, we have it connected right now. So let's repopulate the tubes and see if it works. Alright, that seems to be better. Let's tweak these trimmers and see if things get any better.
And people can be encouraged. The President spoke yesterday to some of the top industrial suppliers in the country. I would tell you, as the President says, the spirit among business America to meet the need of our healthcare workers is truly, our team is working 24/7.
I need to tell you that this song...
So that families can political career.
There's WSM, and we're connected to the long wire antenna, and no more squealing and motorboating and all that crap, so I think it's fixed now. Okay, I just peaked the trimmers for 650, since that's the station I'll be listening to on this, if I listen to it. Alright, one final quick band scan without the help of the fluorescent light.
The Canadian Olympic Committee and Canadian again, this total lie that even the Washington Post had.
The golden retriever relinquishes her dog to a shelter.
Vías preparadas o las... In this circumstance...
Barreras equivocado.
Project is 35517.
Lost pressure off it.
And that's about